Good afternoon, dear colleagues. If everyone's ready, then let's begin our work. I gather that we have more than 50 journalists from 26 media outlets here today, and we also have the representatives of the Analytic Society and some Russian analytical groups. We also have people who use distance format, our colleagues from Lithuania and Ukraine. And we're also live on YouTube channel of the National Press Center. A few words about the modalities of our work today. First of all, Mr. Minister of Foreign Affairs will have the floor, and then we'll have the questions and answers session. If you have some identification marks, please raise them in order to get noticed for your question. And we ask you to ask only one question, and if we have time, we will allow everyone to have second round. Dear colleagues, I am happy to see you here. Welcome to this event. According to the data of some media, of course, we do not doubt this information. Every minute we're waiting the aggression against this country, and some media outlets told that this should have happened yesterday. Well, okay, let's discuss it today. I think you understand this is a joke, but this fact is quite obvious in itself. The level of this information confrontation became really very high, and your colleagues are absolutely serious about creating very dangerous and very hazardous fakes about things in the world, and no one is held responsible for such fakes. And what is more, this disinformation that is made on purpose, many politicians have this information as a basis for making decisions. And unfortunately, today we see this becomes a norm and a very dangerous tendency. I would like to believe that here in this room we have responsible people and honest journalists who adhere to the norms of honest journalism. And I believe that we are all ready for an open and productive discussion. I hope that this format of dialogue is in demand, and I hope that we will make it a good tradition in future. From the point of view of international relations, the year of 2021 was an absolutely new reality for us, and people lived through this year in absolutely different manner. The majority of time and energy was dedicated, unfortunately, not to some creative processes, but to confrontations and to withstanding some threats and dangerous factors that are influencing directly our national interests. And we had to fight for our independence and sovereignty, and this is a fact. In short, I would like to outline the political context of the last year. Of course, the country faced even higher pressure from the Western countries, and the goals were not even disguised. The goal is to destabilize the political and social situation in the country, to strangle the economy, and to plummet the economic level of life in this country, to make people to overthrow the authority or the so-called regime. But no one thinks what happens next. We understand that in today's world and geopolitical context, the priorities for the European Union are important and even vitally important. And Belarus has been chosen as a country that must become an example for punishment and to demonstrate the force and power and the influence the Western countries have in the world. And the Western politicians believe that if they get defeated in this situation, they will lose face, let's say so. And it's clear that the attempt to overthrow the government and destabilize the situation failed. And what's more, the pressure we've faced made our enterprises to become more flexible and to think about diversification. And in the majority of cases, they diversified the export of their products successfully. And we know that we have partners, we have reliable allies, and we have our national interests, and we won't allow to treat Belarus without respect. Second, our country is facing and continues to face the information pressure from within. Our opponents use every possible method and means at hand. My colleague, the foreign minister of Russian Federation, yesterday called this fact the information terrorism, and I absolutely agree with that. The disinformation and fakes are used to demonize this country and to introduce some illegitimate, illegal restrictions against it. And we know about several of such campaigns that happened last year, and they are quite an obvious example of such an approach. First of all, this is the case with the Ryanair flight. The International Association of Aviation published another report, and we clearly see from that report that we have no reason for the hysterics we are witnessing. The second case is the situation at the border, and instead of working with us in a constructive manner, people are blaming us for destructive activities at the border, which is not true. And you know that the refugees are still there at the logistics center. That is their temporary shelter. But our European partners, as if by magic, just forgot about this situation. And for them, but I would like to remind that this problem of uniting families that are currently not together is still there. Another case is the military exercise, and these military exercises here are always demonized, and they're always painted as operations for intervention to some other neighboring countries. The destabilization of spheres of international security and tensions in military and political situation in this region, as well as groundless enforcement of military personnel here in this region, made us, together with Russia and our other partners in CSTO, to think in detail and to decide what we have to do with our military force and our cooperation in that area. And we have also reconsidered our values in political sphere and military cooperation sphere. We see that the situation in the world is volatile and it changes every day. And we see that the relations with some countries became less active, but we balanced that with the more active relations with those countries who are ready to work with us on the basis of mutual respect and equal rights. We've managed to succeed in many activities within our programs of the Union State on the bilateral basis and multilateral basis. Many of these activities were implemented under the Belarusian presidency in CIS, and we continue to establish more active cooperation with the faraway countries. And despite the negative influence of this situation and relations with the European Union, we've managed to succeed, and we had to actually introduce some response against the sanctions that were introduced against Belarus, and we've taken some steps, for example, in visa sector. I would like to underline that currently we are still working on the outlining of our future political international activities, and we are working with the staffing of our embassies in the countries that are currently of the great interest for us. We are also working with the major political and economic centers in Asia, and we've taken a decision to open economic hubs in China, Hong Kong, and Vietnam. We've also have some successful results in foreign economic area. The export of our products and services and goods increased by 2.5% and almost reached $50 million. And we see the progress in practically every production area. And the the growth in this sector continues. From the regional point of view, we see the increasing export in all the countries of the region, but we also work very closely and actively with countries that are located far away. The constitutional process has also become one of the most important processes in this country recently, and the referendum will become one of the milestones in the life of this country. I believe that this transformation and the process of transformation of the main law in the country is corresponding the interests of our country and our nation, but unfortunately not all of our partners are ready to understand that. Of course, the draft of the new constitution is not ideal, but I believe that there is no ideal constitutions in the world. We hope that this new constitution will lay a very robust foundation for future development, progressive development, and will create the so-called system of fuses against the shocks of economic or political disturbances. During this press conference, ladies and gentlemen, I'm ready to answer any of your questions. We have no taboos. It's very important for me that after this meeting you report to your audience objectively about the situation we have in Belarus and around Belarus, and show the objective picture about Belarus in various aspects. And I also hope that you will also pay your attention to the products, the presentation of our products that was organized for you by the enterprises of the Minsk capital region with the support of the Ministry of Agriculture. I hope that you will get acquainted with those products. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm ready to answer your questions. Dear colleagues, if you have questions, please. Okay, let's start with Belta. Vladimir Vladimirovich, I'm from Information Agency Belta. Could you please tell us, in this very turbulent situation of sanctions and overall difficult conditions, the level of relations with China remained very high. We have very robust strategic partnership and mutually beneficial cooperation, and at the same time, the leaders of both countries claimed that they are ready to step up these relations to a significantly new level. Are we talking about the memorandums or some new agreements? Probably we are expecting some new meetings between the presidents of the Chinese People's Republic and the Republic of Belarus. And are we expecting some new major projects, for example, reminding something of the Great Stone Park? Yes, you're absolutely correct to say that China is our strategic partner, and we're very interested in comprehensive cooperation and even deeper cooperation with this country. I was very surprised to read the statement by the representative of one of the American official institutions, that China and Russia are aggressors, and that Belarus and China have an agreement on this Iron Brotherhood, which shows that we are also engaged in these aggressive policies. This is absurd and nonsense. We are interested in cooperation with those countries that open the doors for us. Yes, with China, we have a very high level of relations, and we are among only a dozen of countries who have such a level of relations with China. For us, this cooperation is very beneficial, very useful, because these relations open the door to Chinese market, which is enormous, and export of our goods to China grew last year by 300 or circa 350%. And despite some negative balances in trade with China, we are working very actively in order to rebalance our trade and commercial relations and our trade with China. We are discussing a range of specific projects that are connected with future discovering of new markets in China for our industrial goods and our agricultural products. Very recently, in the late January, the presidents talked over the phone, and they really discussed the possible stepping up of these relations to even a higher level. I wouldn't anticipate anything at this point, and I wouldn't like to state that we are ready to do that in the nearest future, or I wouldn't like to describe any modalities. We are working with our direct contacts, and our leaders are in contact, and I'm sure that as a result of these contacts, we will outline the future projects and the roadmap for activities. Unfortunately, the pandemic delimits our opportunities to have meetings in person, but I am absolutely sure that during the future contacts, our leaders will discuss a range of very important issues, and these issues, these developments will make our cooperation with this country, with China, even more important. And let me one more time say that China is really strategically important for us. Dear colleagues, more questions, please. Al Arabiya, please, you have the floor. Colleagues, do please switch on the microphone. Thank you very much, Mr. Minister, for your welcome here. My name is Abdel Jabad Al-Rashid. I represent the Al Arabiya channel, and I know that the Ministers of Defense of Belarus and Ukraine talked over the phone this week, and they've managed to agree on several things that allow to maintain the security in the region. Does it mean that Minsk and Kiev are ready to normalize their relations? And did Moscow knew beforehand that this phone call was going to take place? Thank you. I am not sure whether Moscow knew about this phone call, because I think not. I think no, because this phone call was initiated. It was Kiev's initiative, and I believe that the Belarusian side have always stated that we're open and transparent to have any discussions, to have a dialogue on any topics, especially the most sensitive ones, and especially those that are in the center of attention of the whole world today. And I mean the tensions that are connected with the issues of security. And a situation that some people are trying to present as the attempt of aggression from the territory of Belarus against Ukraine. We have always been for dialogue between different institutions and ministries, and in this very tense situation, this contact between the ministries of defense of Ukraine and Belarus is a very good sign, and we see it as a very good fact. For quite a time, we've been telling that we are ready and we want to prepare and implement some programs of cooperation between those institutions. And I know about the contacts of the talks they had over the phone. I know that the results are quite positive, and I think that many things were clarified for both sides, especially for the Ukrainian partners. Belarus very clearly stated that no one is going to interfere and to assault and to attack. And currently at the border between Belarus and Ukraine, there is one more issue, and here I'm talking about the military exercise of the Union State, but this should not be seen as a fact that someone is going to carry out this aggression against some other state. We think that the very fact of this talk allowed to bring these tensions down a little bit, down a notch, and especially concerning the military issues. And these talks allowed to somehow dissipate the tensions about the issues that are happening at the border. And for your information, the Minister of Defense of Ukraine invited our ambassador together with the military attaché to the ministry and informed in detail about the position of Ukraine in these talks and the contents of the talks. And I believe we can see these as a positive fact that will result in dissipation of those tensions and eliminating misunderstanding in our relations. In any case, Belarus has always been for open and transparent dialogue, and even concerning the military exercise of the Union State, the Ministry of Defense hold several press briefings dedicated to this topic, and we've invited some observers. For example, we've invited military attaches that are accredited here in the Republic of Belarus to observe the military exercise, and we also invited some observers from the neighboring countries, as well as more than 150 journalists from different countries to cover the events connected with these military exercise. And I think that that proves that the Belarus has good intentions, and this fact explains many things.
I think we'll start with Belarus 1, and then we will move on to the other reporters. Good morning, Belarus 1 TV channel. My name is Maria Petrashka. To continue the topic with Ukraine, I would like to ask a question. How do you estimate and assess the benefits on both Ukrainian and Russian side regarding how the situation is portrayed in the media? The idea is that reportedly and supposedly it is beneficial for Moscow to start the war. So where do you stand on this? I don't think that any actions taken right now would lead to a beneficial war either for Moscow or Minsk or Kiev. Probably it is beneficial and profitable for the people who are very far away from here. And that is exactly why we have this situation with the information proliferation of the situation. We don't have any Cold War, any sanctioned war, any kind of war that would be beneficial to any of the sides. And that's why we are, as a sovereign state, as Belarus, who are now in a geopolitical gap between the East and the West, we would certainly be the first to experience the negative consequences of everything happening around us. And this is why the authorities of the country, in particular the president, have always been against any sort of actions that would agitate the conflict, that would lead to any sort of confrontation between countries around us. Because for us, our survival, let us say, depends on what sort of relations we have with the neighboring countries, with our partnered countries. We have an open economy, export-oriented, and that is why we have never said that we want to go to war. We have always said we want to go to trade, to the market, and we are willing to build those relations with the countries who are willing to support us. Thank you very much. I saw SB Belarus today. My name is Maxim Osipov, SB Belarus today. I would like to comment and to prove the words that you said just now, that the military attaché at the Union exercise, military exercise, stated that he doesn't see any threat from the point of Belarusian military, that they conduct the training, the military exercise in a regular way and everything is fine. In the same line, I would like to bring up the question with Dnipropetrovsk, today's Dniprov. There was a situation with the Belarusian flag and also in Riga earlier last year. And regarding the Belarusian patriotic community, we can see a sort of disagreement regarding the situation, regarding the aggressive position and attitude of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. In particular, the idea is that diplomacy has to be mirror-sided, it has to put out those provocations. But in your opinion, how do you think we all should react to those incidents with the flags and to ensure that we can build beneficial mutual relations with our friendly countries, our friendly neighboring countries, and how can we help our neighboring countries to understand the importance of those actions? It is true we have always been very tolerant about our neighboring countries, that our neighbors are given to us by God. This is what our president says. And we have to ensure that we have friendly relations with our neighboring countries. And it is not us who are to blame for the fact that today we have certain problems with the relations in that field. We know that the problems do not come from our side, because all those situations that are happening around us, all those aggressive steps that are taken towards us, we have to reply to them. We have to react, because otherwise our neighboring countries can see that as a weakness of authority, a weakness of politics. And this is the general idea. If we go into the details regarding the situations in Dnieper, on my own, to my mind, I would say that my own policy is to sort out different sorts of problems through quiet diplomacy. Sometimes it's important to make a loud statement. Sometimes it's essential. But to be entirely honest, I believe that serious things have to be sorted out quietly. We have seen the reaction of the ministry of different ministries to the situation in Dnipro. We immediately reached out to our ambassador and the ambassador of Ukraine with a note of protest regarding that whole situation. We tried to reach out to the governor of Dnipro, the mayor of Dnipro. They declined that invitation to talk. But I would like to say that all this time we have been working on ensuring that we have a stabilized relation with Dnipro regarding that situation. We have talked to the Ukrainian side through our ambassadors, through our ambassador in Kiev in particular. And we have ensured that the Ukrainian side sees what sort of consequences and steps then they can expect from us regarding that situation. Because this is an accident, a thoughtless accident. And it is one thing to comment on the politics of neighboring countries, on the reportedly aggressive actions and steps taken, to put the blame on the officials of a neighboring country for they saw that sort of action. But it is an absolutely different thing to offend the feelings of the nation with a national symbol. We think that is unacceptable. We had a range of measures that we could implement in response to that, but I'm glad that we didn't have to resort to them. Today, after lunch, I have a meeting with the Ukrainian ambassador on his initiative. And I think that the most important thing today is that I saw a picture today from Dnipro, and it shows that all the flags that were put out there of different national minorities, they were replaced with Ukrainian flags. I think that this is how they are trying to get out of this situation. We have always been willing to sort out different issues in a constructive way. But before we take any aggressive steps, we believe it's important to, and we always try and sort out conflicts constructively and peacefully. And I hope we will continue to follow that line of action. Of course, sometimes we want to state something more openly, and that would probably would be beneficial to the people of our country, but we have to consider the geopolitics, the situation on the side of the neighboring countries. So we try to take the peaceful approach. Maybe there are representatives of the Union State media or foreign media. Okay, RIA News. RIA News, my name is Alina Gornia. From the perspective of MFA, what observers were invited to the referendum and why the representatives of OCSE were not invited? Representatives of the Union State and the Shanghai Cooperation Line have been invited. There are more than 100 observers coming from those organizations. We have a huge number of internal observers as well supervising the referendum. More than 30 persons from the European Union have initiated the opportunity to be observers, and we have confirmed that. We'll be delighted to see them as observers at the voting posts. As for the OSCE, the Copenhagen Agreement doesn't necessarily confine us to invite representatives of those structures to observe the referendum. But at a certain step of developing the process, we of course talked about it with the representatives of OSCE. We discussed it. We suggested the idea of them coming to us, discussing the issue. And we had this intention of inviting ODIHR, OSCE to the referendum, but unfortunately we received the response that this is not the situation that would bring any sort of benefit to any of the sides. They expressed their willingness that they are not going to observe the referendum. If I'm not mistaken, last year I met the head of ODR last year in Stockholm. We covered a lot of issues, but after the responses that we got from them, we did not initiate the process of inviting the representatives. But the problem is deeper. The problem is not the referendum, it's the ODR, the politics of Western countries towards ODR. If it continues, the importance of that organization will come to a minimum, because very often they talk about general standards for everyone regarding the observation of referendums, of voting situations. But we can see that very often in Western countries, those standards are not necessarily kept up, and we do not see any observers scrutinizing over the situation in some countries, and in others, in some countries they send 4 observers, and in others it's about 600 observers. And as a result, I think we can see that some countries, in particular Belarus and Russia, have stopped inviting the organization to observe the polling places, the referendums, because the outcome reports are very often written beforehand. They are politicized, and it just doesn't make any sense for us to invite representatives from such organizations if we already know what their report and answer will be. So I think it's ODR that has to consider their actions and draw conclusions from our reactions and the fact that this organization has not been invited on a regular basis to a lot of countries and situations. I think this trend is going to continue. I know what I'm talking about. I have consulted my colleagues on that. The Washington Post, please. Good afternoon, The Washington Post. Several years ago, Minsk held the key peaceful position regarding the relations of the neighboring countries, but recently we saw from the president several statements regarding the importance of defending the borders, of how the war could take about 3 or 4 days. So I would like to clarify what regarding the military exercise. How many soldiers are there, and what is going to happen to the military equipment after the military exercise is over? Belarus has always kept a friendly relation with our neighboring country, Ukraine. We see it as a friendly neighbor, as our brother-like state, as our trade and economic partner, our important partner, our second important partner after Russia. It's more than 7 billion of trade that we have with Ukraine, and we have very close trade and economic relations. And we should not discard the human factor, the fact that our nations, our people have always been close. We don't feel this physical border between the countries. It's very common that Ukrainian nationals, for us to come to Belarus to gather berries during the gathering season, during the harvest season. We know that it is essential in some of the regions, in Brest region, in Grodno region. We understand that. We were not the initiators of worsening those relations. It was the other side. And we were surprised to see that other side acting in a way that would initiate a number of steps that would impose sanctions on us from other countries. In particular, I mean the ban on Belarusian flights and aviation through the airspace of Ukraine. The president of Belarus has never said that he's ready, if there is a war, to sort it out in 3 or 4 days. That Ukraine would fall or Kiev would be taken. The president has never said that we would take a tank and go there. He said that we would come on a tractor, and this is an important statement. It is a statement in itself. As for the current military exercise, as part of the Union state, they are planned, they're regular. They help us assess how ready we are in case of an urgent situation, in case of an emergency. The fact that they are happening in Belarus, on the territory of Belarus, is easily explained because we can see the sort of activity that NATO has along our border in the west. And this is the sort of support that we have in that area. No soldier, no single piece of military equipment will be left in Belarus after the military exercise is over. That has been stated by the president, that has been stated by our side as part of many events with OSCE. As for the number of the soldiers, they do not exceed the numbers stated in the Union documents. We have stated it clearly several times, both at the events with OSCE and the events that were conducted with the Baltic states recently and some other countries. We haven't broken any of the commitments or regulations in line with the Vienna document or any other.
Andrei Semchenko representing Belarus 1. Vladimir Vladimirovich, many people paid attention to the reaction of Yerevan on President's statements on integration perspectives for Armenia. What do you think? What caused such a reaction, and do we have diplomatic conflict between the countries? You know, I think that this issue, this question, was given too much attention, and some political forces of Armenia have given too much attention to this issue. Because you have to consider the statement by the Armenian president in entirety, and there weren't any words about forcing someone to join an integration association whatsoever. I can tell you from my personal experience, when, after the events of the 2020, we warned that such attempts of intervention to other countries of post-Soviet territory are possible, some of our colleagues were doubtful, and during the meetings of CSTO, our colleagues treated such ideas almost laughing. But then we had events in Kazakhstan, and this fact speaks for itself. And of course, the mood of our colleagues changed. Here, in this situation, I really don't understand why are we talking about the diplomatic conflict, because the president of Belarus mused on the fact that such an event or such events that are happening now around this country, around Kazakhstan, and the events connected with the tensions and creating those tensions in military sector, all those things can lead to the more active integration association processes between post-Soviet countries. And I see these words in this light. And as for the Union State, for many times we've said that no one is forcing anyone to join the economic union or the Union State, although those structures are absolutely open for new members to join them. And we see that there is interest in other countries. And some countries have already stated their readiness to sign the agreements with the Eurasian Economic Union, and some countries are observers in this structure. So that's why the process is going on. We see the dynamic, and I am absolutely sure that sooner or later these structures will definitely be even more attractive for other members and for other states, especially those of the post-Soviet territory. Our main goal is to reach such a level of cooperation within the Union State and the Eurasian Economic Union, and to make these structures really attractive for other states. And we do everything to reach that goal, and the decisions we took last year to implement the provisions of the documents of the Union State will most surely lead to positive results and deeper integration, and many countries will see the benefits from participating in such associations and integration organizations. The representatives of Estonia, Mr. Minister, the representative of the Estonian television, my name is Anton Alexeyev. I want to ask, Belarus has always been known for its multi-pronged international foreign policy, and Belarus was called one of the main initiators and drivers of such a trend. And now we see that the Western vector died out, and we see only the Western vector developing. So probably the main problem in your relations with main problem with relations with Europe is the policies of President Lukashenko, and we won't see any positive shifts in this aspect while Mr. Lukashenko is president here. So what do you think about that? There are several things. First, yes, we have always been telling that our foreign policy is multi-pronged, multi-vector policy, and we stay true to this fact. And this tendency will be reflected in all the future documents connected with our foreign policy activities. We believe that we have every ground to have such a policy, and we do not deny the fact that those vectors of development can be different in size and volumes. And we are absolutely interested in developing further relations and deepen the relations with our strategic neighbor, our brotherly nation, Russia. And we have always been telling that people shouldn't see this suspiciously, because there is nothing to be suspicious about. It's absolutely normal for us to aspire to have good relations both with Russia and the Western countries. Yes, of course, unfortunately, now we can say that the level of our cooperation with the European Union is, and with the collective West in general, is very low. But it's not our fault. And those 5 packages of sanctions that were introduced against Belarus are not given as grounds to say that we are going to have normal relations between Belarus and the countries of the West. Let me repeat one more time. We are not to blame for this. It's not our fault, and your statement that the president or the certain person is to blame is groundless for me. And I don't think this is a good point in this argument. I think that the problem lies in the inadequate assessment of the situation by our Western partners, assessment of what is going on in Belarus and around Belarus, and the information on briefing of an anonymous representative of the State Department of the United States is suspicious. When I read the statements of the leaders of the neighboring countries, our neighbors Lithuania and Latvia and Poland, I read these statements and I get quite surprised by them. You know, I think that there is certain problems with the brain integrity of some representatives of the Western politics, and they lost their capability to assess the situation adequately. And this inadequate assessment leads to mistakes in their policies concerning Belarus. Yes, you may listen to those who are in Vilnius or Warsaw, because it's clear, and it's clear for me, that they have certain motives. But a serious politician, a serious political figure, wouldn't follow the calls made by those people staying in Warsaw or Vilnius, because I understand their motives. I won't go deeper into that issue, but the serious politics is not about that. So believe me, the problem is not us. We are ready to have dialogue with our partners, including such difficult partners, because for us these difficult partners are the countries of the European Union, although not all of them. But this dialogue must be based on mutual respect and equal rights. It must not be belligerent dialogue, and we do not see the readiness from our partners to have such a dialogue. We don't see this readiness in our neighbors, and we don't see this readiness in the partners from the European Union to have this normal dialogue with us. But if you don't want to talk with those who really understands the decisions and implements these decisions in the Republic of Belarus, I doubt the efficiency of the policies from your side. There will be mistakes and discrepancies. Народная воля, you have the floor, please. Marina Koktesh from Народная воля. Vladimir Vladimirovich, you told and you called on the civil society to voice their opinions, alternative opinions, and you said that you're ready to hear and to listen. And I want to ask, how are you going to listen and to hear when we have big problems with freedom of speech, and Народная воля and other independent media don't have access to the distribution system and the printing facilities? So the legitimate organizations and parties that have official status just cannot voice their opinion in the official media. So how are you working on your foreign policy today when you cannot solve the problem with the freedom of speech within the country? Thank you. I cannot agree with your statement concerning the fact that we do not have alternative points of view or that we don't have freedom of speech and so on and so forth. Freedom of speech existed and it exists, but unfortunately in the situation, and I mean the situation of the year of 2020, many people abused this term, which is the freedom of speech. And I mean some media outlets and some specific journalists that turned from objective journalists to opposition ideologists, and they made no secret about that. So they presented information under a certain light and were directly saying things ruining the reputation of the authorities, which is far away from the principles of objective journalism. We won't have any dialogue with those who is carrying out anti-state policies and calls for sanctions against the country and calls for additional pressure against Belarus and is happy and when another package of sanctions is being adopted and introduced. I'm absolutely agree with Zenon Pozniak, who says they're very far away from the real people, and recently I really like the statements made by this politician. And, you know, for those people, in such a situation, they don't think about people first and foremost. They think primarily about their own interests and things that matters to them personally. As for the civil society, the head of the state said more than once that we have plans for the development of a regulation or law on the initiatives of the civil society. Currently, everyone who is willing is taking part in the process of discussion of the laws and the constitution, and many of the parties and such groups introduced their ideas and suggested some ideas for the text of the constitution, and these ideas were accepted. So everyone who wants to be heard has actually such an opportunity. I continue to have meetings with the people who want to express the alternative points of view, and I think this is a normal process. And we take these points of view into account in our activities daily. I understand you, and I understand the position of your media outlet, because you are working and you are functioning, but you should also think about a more regular position and clear position, because you shift in your opinions quite regularly and it's not quite good, and that doesn't lead to the vision of your media outlet as an objective one. But we try to give the floor to everyone who wants to do so, those who represent the official opinions and those who represent the alternative opinions. I see things changing, and I see that you give the floor to absolutely everyone, and in 2020 your position was very clear. And before that, I had the numerous meetings with your chief editor, and we've discussed a lot of things. And we shared quite a lot of views on quite a lot of things concerning the development of this country in the future. But unfortunately, and generally speaking, this position of yours and the position of some other media outlets and journalists is leading to the fact that we see the situation that is going on here in the country. Whether it's good or bad, the future will show us, but let me repeat one more time. When some media outlets take this clearly, openly anti-authority stance and become opposition ideologies, this is unacceptable. When some non-governmental organizations, under the guise of some ecological activities or something like that, in reality carry out anti-government activities, it's unacceptable. So that's why I think the state has every right to react adequately and to respond adequately to such a situation, to such activities, in order to prevent the repetition of such situations in the future. Good afternoon, Natalia Niakovskaya, Вестник Белнефтехим. My question is about the oil sector that makes quite a significant part of the GDP of this country. Vladimir Vladimirovich, how do you assess the role of this sector in the foreign economic activities of the country in the situation when practically all of our enterprises suffered from sanctions, and what is the future for them? Venezuela, for example, always helped us with the crude oil. Probably we have some new projects to talk about today. Yes, petroleum sector is a very important sector for us, and it's clear that it makes up quite a significant share in the country's GDP, but we try not to delimit us only by this area. Yes, unfortunately, last year we've seen some sanctions being introduced against the enterprises in this sector, but, and I've already told that, we are trying to adapt to the situation while we continue to operate, and we are trying to take into account all the restrictive measures. We have a corresponding group within the government that is dealing with the assessment of the influence of sanctions and other restrictive measures on different sectors of economy and well-being and welfare of the citizens and economy, and prepares the adequate response. I wouldn't like to go deeper and to describe in detail these measures, but believe me, we are working on the fact that our citizens should not suffer and should not feel the influence of the sanctions in their everyday life. Yes, it's very difficult. It's a very tricky work, but we are in contact with different powers, with different organizations and states, trying to find ways to minimize the sanctions pressure and influence that our people are suffering right now. Vladimir Vladimirovich, Lithuania, we know, denied to transport the potassium fertilizer through its territory, and after that the president said that Russian ports can be seen as the alternative to that route. Do you have some official agreements and arrangements on that issue between Moscow and Russia right now? Yes, we already have some agreements on transporting some goods, not only potassium fertilizers, through ports of Russia. And we continue this work. It's clear that this process won't be over in one day. And in order to reach the maximum result, we'll have to wait for some time, and we'll have to apply some effort, and we will have to contribute some financial means, and currently we're working quite actively on that issue. And believe me, it's not a fairy tale, it's not a fantasy. We have quite a detailed, concrete work in order to establish contacts and work actively with Russian ports in order to transport Belarusian goods. And sooner or later, we will see that this will pay off in future and the situation will normalize. If our partners don't want to do that, we will find some other partners and we will take some steps in order to to neutralize the negative influence and consequences for us that are connected with the transporting our goods through Lithuanian ports or Latvian ports. So we will take the corresponding steps.
Good morning. Izvestia, a newspaper, and you said at the beginning that we still have the problem with the migrants. So what does Belarus plan regarding the migrants that you still have in the country? First of all, I'd like to say that once again, the statements towards Belarus that we organized somehow this migration crisis are not true. Initially, in April last year, we suggested to the European Union this idea that after they have stopped financing a number of programs in the field, we have suggested that we discuss the issues of migration. No response was given to us regarding our initiative. The financing of the correspondent refugee camps and houses that take care of migrants, that financing has been stopped. All the infrastructural projects at our western border have been ceased to an end. And we had to reorient that financing to ensure that we can protect our country from the foreign threats, from the threat coming from the outside. The situation as it is, I don't want to comment on it further on because we have already talked about all those things before. As for the situation today, we have about more than 700 migrants. Out of them, 270 are children. These are people who don't want to go back to their native land, but don't want to stay in Belarus either. So we talked to our partners, we tried to discuss this idea, how we can forward them back. For those who can't do that, for others, how we can help them migrate further. But a number of migrants wanted to go to the Western countries because their families live there and they want to reunite with those families. Some of them live in Germany, some of them live in Great Britain, in the Netherlands, and so on and so forth. The European Union, at a certain point, agreed to discuss those issues. They sent the so-called technical group, but the group refused to meet the migrants in person. They just came in to check, to see that we are cooperating with international organizations, that is the International Organization on Migration, the UNCHR, the Red Cross, and also all the other organizations. And this is the reason why they came. They didn't need to come here to ensure that we do all of that. They could just request the information from the embassies, but after we talked with Mr. Borrell and the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs talked with his colleagues, the talks ceased to an end. We don't have any discussion going on right now. Nobody is interested in the fate of those 700 migrants that we still have in the country. This, for us, shows what sort of standards there are in the world, in the neighboring countries, towards Belarus. Why, for instance, the European Union or international human rights organizations avert their eyes when we tell them of the people deceased in Poland, in Lithuania, the dead bodies that were thrown over the border to our country, the people that had to leave Poland and Lithuania because they were pushed out of the country. They avert their eyes, they keep quiet, and this for us is a statement in itself. The same concerns Poland and Lithuania and Latvia. They have violated about 6 international agreements that confine them to considering the requests on providing refugee placements, and we see that these actions on the side of the European Union speak for themselves. Besides, about $1 million has been promised in the field of assisting with the refugee crisis, but we have never received that money. And NTV, thank you very much. It's NTV program today. First of all, we have a question regarding the invasion. It was expected yesterday and probably will still be expected today, but still there have been statements from the American side, from the Ukrainian side. But you, as a pure person, as a human, have you felt somehow irritated about it, angry, or just tired, anxious? Do you think those provocations have influenced somehow the situation? Is it easy for you to get across your own view, your own position to your partners in the West? Because when you ask why is this whole thing going to happen, and some people say just because it can. So this question is not sorted out, it's just prolonged for weeks, for months. What do you think the story depends on? I don't think it's about the military. What do you think? Personally, I would like to say that I didn't feel much pressure about this whole situation, this whole hysteria, about the tension and the escalation of the tension. I've heard from my colleagues, from my acquaintances, my friends in Ukraine, for instance, that they have been asking questions. Yes, they have asked me questions, whether there's going to be a war, whether they're going to take their families away from Kiev, from Kharkov. I tried to calm them down, to explain to them that everything is going to be fine. Of course, there is some sort of anxiety, but I'm trying to be entirely open and honest with you. I have never doubted the fact that Belarus will never take any actions, any military actions towards Ukraine. Of course, provocations can always happen, but as I've said, pay attention to the source of that hysteria. Because if we look deeper, if we consider the reasons for that historical behavior, I believe that the problem is that the fact that Russia has been very initiative regarding regional and international security, and the suggestions made by President Putin regarding the call to meeting of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council and all the other suggestions, I believe they're important. And in particular, the written proposal made by Russia regarding the security guarantees that were forwarded to NATO, to the United States. I think the problem is the fact that the people who received those proposals did not see it as beneficial either to respond either positively or negatively. They received some sort of responses. They sent those responses to Russia, but they were not either positive or negative. But against the backdrop of what's happening around us, in our region in particular, I think those written proposals from the Russian Federation mean nothing to them. And this is through this hysteria, this escalating of tensions, and this information terrorism, as Lavrov put it, and through specific actions that we're taking, through trying to make Ukraine a part of this situation, I think this is how They tried to minimize those proposals regarding security guarantees by Russia. They tried to put them down to a minimum, to nullify them, to the fact that all those things are not relevant. This is how I see the situation. This is very personal. But I believe everything happening around Ukraine right now is artificial. It is created artificially by forces that do not want Russia to play a key role in ensuring security in the region and in the world as a whole. This is a battle of who is the strongest, who will prevail, which country is the strongest, which country takes the first place, the second, and the third. Any other?
Turkish colleague. I'm going to speak in English. I hope that's not a problem. Yusuf Aram, TRT World. Now, the first part of my question is our colleague just a minute ago talked about the West giving dates, February 16th, February 18th, as possible days for a military engagement. Do you feel that this type of giving of a date undermines peace talks, and that in the event there is a peaceful solution, that this could impact the domestic standing of the Russian president, where it would be used as a climb down or a show of weakness? And my second part of my question is about the CSTO. Now, I wanted you to evaluate Belarus's participation in Kazakhstan and how the CSTO performed there in their unprecedented military engagement. Also, NATO expansion is commonly seen as a national security threat in Russia, and I believe Belarus shares this view. Has the CSTO talked about expansion, and has the CSTO discussed any type of scenario where it would be called to participate in any type of military engagement between Russia and Ukraine?
Yes, despite the fact that a number of Western politicians came to Moscow and talked to President Putin and made a number of statements during the press conference, despite the fact that from Minsk and from Moscow there are constant statements regarding no threat, the fact that there is no threat to the neighboring countries, we can still see people speculating regarding when this intervention, military aggression, will start against this or that country. Once again, we can hear these dates such as the 18th February and other dates that you've mentioned. I think that this is a consequence of, and the consequence of that is a number of jokes that we can see, how people asking us to tell us the dates. Can you please tell me the date when you're going to attack so that I can plan my holiday and my vacation? We have been through that. I remember the whole hysteria about the military drill West 2018 and other similar military drills when we were accused of some sort of violations, and the forces around us tried to make it look like the military drills of Belarus and Russia are a threat to the regional security, to the world security. First, they discuss what sort of threat those actions can bring for a year, and then for another year they discuss why that didn't happen. I'm sure that the situation right now is going to unfold the same way. I don't know what sort of argumentation you should bring to the table to ensure that our partners in the West finally realize that there is no threat, there is no danger. The fact that there is a lack of trust, a certain level of trust, leads to us not being able to normalize the situation, that the situation not being able to come to an end peacefully in terms of the things that are being said, in terms of some meetings or events that could be conducted. What I mean is that we have long suggested, the president himself suggested this initiative to have a large-scale international dialogue, let's say Helsinki 2. It was perceived very skeptically, even though this idea was essential at that point, and the president and Finland said, we should actually gather together because of the anniversary of the Helsinki Act, and maybe take it to the table, to the negotiations table, and discuss how we can continue, how we can build those relations when there is this military tension around us. We believe that this necessity, for instance, as part of the OSCE, to organize a full-scale meeting of heads of states, this necessity is long due. Of course, this meeting needs some preparation, but it would lead to restoration of a certain level of trust between countries that are now divided to us and the others. We have always been supportive towards that sort of dialogue. We believe it's only dialogue that can help us sort out any issue, all the issues. As for the fact that Belarusian military, as for the situation with the Belarusian military and the CSTO in Kazakhstan, we believe that request and the fact that Belarusian military was sent there helped to stabilize the situation. The soldiers, the military, never took part in any sort of military action. They guarded infrastructural objects, security objects, but the way that the situation unfolded has shown how this organization acts, how effective it is. And as a result, we had a video conference of head of states, part of OSCE, where CSTO, where we reached a conclusion and we learned the lessons that would help us be more efficient in the future. As for the growth of NATO, our position has always been clear. It hasn't changed since the 90s. We have always been against making NATO bigger. We believe that the promises, verbal promises, that were given to Gorbachev regarding the expansion of NATO have been violated. And that's why we have the situation we have today, when nobody trusts anybody else, when we have our side and the other side, and when such platforms as the Permanent Council OSCE, as the Security Council of the UN, is just a platform for battle, for confrontation. And it's unfortunate that we have lost this San Francisco spirit when the UN was created, when despite huge geopolitical confrontation and disagreements that we could see at that time, heads of state of different states, of different countries that were on opposite sides of the barricade, the so-called barricade, they united to create that organization that would take care of peace and war, and created a mutually acceptable algorithm of action despite those polarized views and attitudes. Unfortunately, today we have lost that spirit. And we can see this sort of infantile behavior in politics in a number of Western countries' politicians. We cannot find any sort of common ground for dialogue with them. But today it's extremely important.
Okay, let's now give the floor to the ONT channel. Good afternoon, Vlada Karnitskaya from ONT. Vladimir Vladimirovich, recently we've seen the announcement of the meeting with the President Putin. What do you think? Which topics will be discussed? What is the agenda? And one more question. What do you think how the situation with Belarus will develop? Because the restrictions were not lifted even after the Aviation Association presented its report proving that the Belarusian side is not to blame. So what do you think? What else the Western partners need? Yes, such a meeting between the leaders is being planned. And as usual, it will be dedicated to all possible issues, and they will discuss all the issues of interests. We've prepared our suggestions on topics to discuss during the meeting and proposed for the discussion by the President of Belarus. But let me say one more time that during such meetings, we discussed all possible topics and all important issues. Of course, the leaders will talk about the security situation, I think, and the situation in trade and commerce partnership and the response to sanctions. I believe that these questions will certainly be discussed. Let's wait and see what results this meeting will bring, and I think that after the meeting the leaders will make a press appearance and will tell us what they discussed. As for the situation with Belarus, initially we were telling that these sanctions are ungrounded and they contradict all international agreements and standards. And we were surprised even then by the rush with which the sanctions were introduced against our aviation company. The situation happened on Sunday, and Sunday is usually a day when the leaders of the European countries keep silent. And here we saw that, as if by magic, within 24 hours, the reactions of the leaders of the Western countries ensued, and they made statements even though they themselves have nothing to do with the situation with Belarus altogether. We asked the association to request the corresponding documents from the countries that were involved in this case, like Poland and Lithuania and Ireland. But unfortunately, the report by this organization does not have the answer to the questions we posed in front of them. That's why as far as for our position, we requested one more time to start the investigation concerning the countries that imposed ungrounded sanctions against the company Belarus and country, against all the existing international standards and documents. We see the attempt to influence the association by we see that the countries, Western countries, try to influence the association to get the results that they want to get. We think this is unacceptable. We work with the members of the organization, with our partners in this organization, and naturally we will follow the situation closely and take steps aimed at lifting the ungrounded restrictions imposed against our company. Let me repeat one more time. These restrictions, these steps were ungrounded, thoughtless, but if the association won't terminate such a decision, that will be a clear demonstration, not only for us, it will be a clear manifestation for everyone in the world that politicized decisions and politicization of certain issues is going on and keeps going on in sectors where it shouldn't happen at all. And here we speak about the security in the aviation sector. Politics should not be there, because there we think and speak only about the security and protection of people who use aviation transport. Our colleague from Ukraine, who is working through internet with us, Andrei Buzarov, who represents the banned media outlets in Ukraine, asked us to ask two questions. First, how do you assess the overall situation with security at the border? What threats are you expecting, and so on? And how do you see the place of Belarus in the system of new regional security that the Eurasian continent is currently building? And how Belarus assesses its own situation with security in the situation all the post-Soviet countries are facing right now? The questions are quite extensive. I would like to remind you that Belarus is the CSTO organization, and we work in close contact with all the partners within these organizations. Members of the CSTO, we have regular meetings at all levels, ministers and state secretaries and ministers of foreign affairs, and of course, heads of states. And we make decisions, we take decisions aimed at ensuring the security for people at the territory of the CSTO, according to the threats we are facing. Some time ago, we've been actively discussing Afghanistan, and we keep discussing that situation. We see the threats that this direction poses for us, and we take specific steps in order to enhance security of the countries neighboring with Afghanistan. As for our contribution to the provision of security within the CSTO territory, I would like to say that despite the fact that we've always been for peaceful policies, we have always been stating that Belarus won't be the platform for aggression, to launch aggression against other countries. And these words will be reflected in the new constitution if this draft will be voted for during the referendum. We've been always adhered to the position that you must be ready to respond to the aggression wherever it comes from. And that's why we will even further strengthen our military cooperation with Russia within the corresponding agreements. We have a regional group of forces within the Union state, and we will also develop our military and technical partnership and cooperation with the CSTO countries. We see that, taking into account the things that we've been discussing today, taking into account the irrational and unreasonable policies that are implemented by the NATO countries and some Western partners, we must keep our gunpowder dry and be ready. And Belarus, as a medium-sized state, is not able to withstand any threat alone. We will not be able to withstand any possible military actions against us alone. That's why we see this necessity to develop very close military and technical cooperation within the Union state and within the CSTO. I understand that Minsky Dialogue wants to add a few words about that. Yes, thank you very much. Anatoly Anatolievich warned that I would probably have an opportunity to ask my question, so I would like to use this opportunity to continue the discussion of the previous question. Up to the year of 2020, me and my colleagues from different structures, from both sides of this so-called almost Iron Curtain, we've clearly seen tendencies in behaviors in the Western countries. Some tendencies concern the behavior of the Baltic states, which is the risks they've taken, and I'm not here to assess whether it's bad or good, but we clearly see that there was a tendency in the sphere of security, and the brightest reflection of this tendency was the events that we see right now. And another tendency was relations with Belarus. We've seen the growth of military risks, and currently I understand that there is a certain consensus in the media and between the politicians and analytical experts that Belarus actually stepped away from that trend to keep quiet, to keep low, and is also trying to secure a more significant presence in the international area. Maybe that's connected with the re-evaluation of the foreign policy and military policies, or probably this is a premature conclusion. And if this is a premature conclusion, how Belarus can return to this constructive, peaceful role it played in the region, especially taking into account the fact that the regional situation has changed significantly. Partially, I have already answered some of your questions, and I would like to repeat one more time that we have always been for peaceful decisions concerning any issues, and we were against escalation of tensions, regardless here in this region or in other regions of the planet. The problem boils down to the fact, and I've already told that today we don't have politicians who would absolutely adequately assess the situation, and we've lost this San Francisco spirit. It's unknown how quickly we can overcome such a problem. That depends on us. The faster everyone understands the necessity to renounce this division to us and the others, the quicker we will find some common decisions and solutions that will allow us to objectively assess the situation in the region and to find ways and suggestions that will be in the interest of this region and the planet in general. Belarus cannot be reproached for the contribution in the tensions or escalation of such tensions in the region or beyond. I would like to remind you about the initiatives I have already mentioned. We've been working closely in all possible sectors, starting with the fight against the pandemic, and we've always been telling that we should ensure diversity in the ways of development for each state, for each nation. And I've already mentioned our initiatives we suggested concerning this Helsinki II agreement. And we've also introduced an initiative connected to the establishment of the so-called digital good neighborhood belt. And all those ideas, all those things were discussed during the very important high-profile events that were organized by Minsk Dialogue. And although some people tried to connect this platform with the authorities, it was not so, and we were really glad to work with you together because you've managed to create a platform, and you've mentioned that during the last conference. That was a platform where people talked to each other, not about each other, and that was very important, and the leader of Serbia and the leader of Kosovo managed to communicate. The officials from Ukraine and Russia were also able to discuss all the issues concerning the Ukrainian crisis. So I see the way out only in this. We must find common grounds, and we, in our attempts to establish and continue dialogue, despite the fact that it's really very difficult. We do not intend to deny this role, to reject this position, and we will make steps to guarantee that the escalation is ruled out of the situation. But of course, we cannot sit and watch calmly the situation that is unraveling around us. And if the situation requires, we will have to respond to the issues connected with the escalation of tensions in this region, at our southern border, at our western border. We will take adequate steps in that direction. But now I think the most important thing for the leaders of the leading countries, leading states, is to stop, to think for a while, and to understand that further escalation, further hysteria, especially concerning the issues of security, won't lead to any good results. And we should start with the positive reactions to the President Putin's initiatives and organize the meetings of 5 members of the Security Council. And then it's understandable that we don't want it, but the 5 leading states are the actors on whom the situation, the development of the situation in the world depends. So in future, it will also be very important to work in detail on the opportunity and possibility of the meeting within the OSCE, the heads of states of the OSCE. And we've mentioned these ideas for quite a time, and President Lukashenko mentioned these initiatives several years ago. But it's understandable that, taking into account the attitude to our country, which is very often very skeptical, still I think that sooner or later we will reach that result, and we are ready to play our role, contributing to the dialogue in this region at the OSCE territory area, and we're ready to propose specific projects, and in future we intend to further play the role of the peacekeeper and the role of the country that is donor of security, despite the situation that we have between us and the European Union. The Polish press agency. Thank you. My name is Justyna Pros. I would like to ask a question from me and to clarify a few things that you've touched upon a little bit previously. For more than a year, 2 representatives of Polish minority, the Union of Poles in Belarus, are being detained in Żodyno, and we don't have practically any information, not on the investigation that is underway, not about them, and we do not have the information on their health, which is really very concerning for us. We received signals that Angelika is not well. I want to ask if the Ministry of Foreign Affairs has any information on the investigation and probably the time frame of the further steps and actions concerning those people, and especially on the state of health of Andrzej and Angelika. And it's really very difficult to get the information, so probably the ministry, as a natural addressee of the journalists, can actually support us in our desire to get this information. And one more thing is about the military exercise, military drill, and participants from Russia. Previous years, the information about the number of troops and the equipment was made available, but currently we don't have clear information, and the data and the information on the Vienna document is not really clear for me. Do we speak about 13,000 or 10,000 people, or do we take into account the bilateral agreements with Ukraine and Poland, where this number is much, much lower? So if you can please clarify this moment, thank you. As for the drill, I've told that more than once. I don't think that we should develop it any further. Anything that happens in the territory of the Republic of Belarus does not go against the 2011 Vienna document. More detailed information can be obtained from the Ministry of Defense, as I believe you're accredited to take part as a journalist in the drill, so you'll have an opportunity to have this detailed information on the numbers of the troops present in different regions of this country, representing different countries in this drill. Of course, the military activities of Poland is also of concern for us, and we see that they use it as a guise for. We see that they use the guise of migrant activity to increase the number of military forces at the border, and at least 15,000 military men are there at our western border, close to our western border. So all the questions that are connected with the military exercise or between Russia and Belarus was made available to the OSCE when it was requested by the Baltic states, who tried to refer to the corresponding documents. We've made all detailed information available, so what concerns our Polish neighbors, unfortunately, we do not such information about them. That's why we have our concerns, and we will initiate such a request from our Polish colleagues. As for the people you've mentioned, persons in detention, then we've already received the messages of concern from our Polish colleagues connected with the state of health of these people, and we made corresponding requests to the detention facilities where are currently at, and we received messages that their health is not in danger. We've had certain agreements connected with the further situation with the citizens that were detained for violation of the corresponding norms of the Belarusian legislation. 3 of such people were set free, and this process continued, and I believe that the 2 people remaining were also the things connected with those 2 people were discussed in a constructive way, but as we now see that our Polish partners decided to use this information, to use this situation to make it a clickbait, to make it a reason to hype the situation further and to use it in their for ideological purposes. These people are detained, these 2 people that you've mentioned are detained because they violated the corresponding norms of the Belarusian legislation, and there is a certain order for such situations to be ruled out. We have no right to interfere into the activities of the court organizations, justice system, but any information we receive from them will be considered, and we will make this available, and we will work together with the law enforcement agencies to make them available. So you currently have information that their health is in good state. Yes, probably a month ago, we've received the information because we made requests for that, and we've received the answer that their health is good.
Okay, then we will start with Tess. My name is Yulia Kocheveli. Vladimir Vladimirovich, I have a question. Are you aware of how many Belarusian citizens are now in Ukraine? And if the situation escalates and there is a threat to their lives, what actions can the Belarusian side take to protect the lives of their citizens? Do you think Russia and Ukraine are ready to preserve the status quo? The juro fact that the Crimea is Russian and the rest is Ukrainian, and also what is the problem with the border, the car access on the border between Belarus and Ukraine? How many people are right now Belarusians are now in Ukraine on a temporary basis? Well, when they leave the country, there should be some sort of control regarding the numbers of people who have left the country through the Ukrainian border and are now there. I can't say specifically. I am not aware of that information for now. If something happens, then of course we can resort to the agencies in charge who can find out the numbers, who can contact the people there. A specific number of people, I don't think that I can give you that number right now. As for the relations between Russia and Ukraine, I don't think I can answer that either. We have to ask that to the representatives of those countries, to the authorities of those countries, but I believe it's important to keep up the good relations and the commitments made, in particular after that 18-hour marathon discussion, which led to a number of agreements, a number of commitments that were signed that now allow to resolve the difficult situation in the east of Ukraine. Today we can see that all the countries blame the others on not keeping up those commitments, on violating those commitments. But we believe that first of all, it's Kiev who should keep up those commitments, particularly the ones that they were signed by the Kiev authorities. But once again, I think we have to be friendly in the way, and everyone involved has to keep up a friendly attitude to the situation, a willingness to resolve it peacefully. As for the car access through the border between Belarus and Russia, as part of the Union state, you know that the AV access is open, that the railway access is open, but as for the car access, our colleagues say that the difficult epidemiological situation doesn't provide for us opening it anytime soon. But with the fact that we have AV access and railway access, the car access is not a problem in itself. We think we have also considered this. We bring it up regularly during our meetings with Russian authorities, and we hope that in the near future, we hope that the citizens of Belarus and of Russia will be able to go through the border by car smoothly. RIA Novosti, please. Recently, it was made aware that the Ukrainian railway system has stopped the transportation of Belarusian fertilizers. Is there going to be any sort of similar action, mirror action on Belarusian side? We, as the government, have already created a specific group regarding the sanctions taken against us from different countries and try and react in an adequate way. And we think that in this situation, we should first of all analyze the situation thoroughly and then make the decision that would be adequate and correspondent so that it doesn't harm our national economic interests. That is how I would like to answer your question. If you don't mind, then I would like to read a question from our Lithuanian colleague from the newspaper Respublik. Right now, illegal migrants are going to Latvia and Poland, but not to Lithuania in particular. Do you think it's the result that our border is kept up better, or is it because they don't see our country as a heaven in a way? I think it is clear that Lithuania has never been a very attractive, heaven-like country for migrants, and lots of migrants used the opportunity to go through Belarus and Lithuania's transit to reach the so-called key democratic countries such as Germany, Great Britain, France, the Netherlands. So as for that flow of migrants and how well the border is kept up, it's protected the same way that it was before. We are keen on keeping up our international commitments regarding that field. But as for the policy of Lithuania, Poland, we believe some of the things that were done towards migrants on their side, on the side of our neighboring countries of Poland and Lithuania, were appalling. Colleagues, I think we're going for a third round. Then we will go to Народная воля. Republican Confederation of Entrepreneurs, I would like to give the floor to my colleague Anastasia, specialist on foreign travels. The President of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko, has signed a decree of the Union State on different fields of implementation of the agreement of the Union State on the period from 2022 to 2023. As a part of that, we have roadmaps and draft projects that would enhance the integration between the two countries. There is work on harmonizing a number of legal acts, a huge number of legal acts. So the question is, representatives of business community in Belarus, the entrepreneurs, will they be part of that technical group working on harmonizing the legal norms and legislation regarding them? Yes, in the upcoming 2 years, we will have to take on a huge amount of work regarding those 28 programs that were taken on the 4th of November last year. You're right that we will have to sign more than 400 specific documents regarding our trade and economic and custom cooperation between Belarus and Russia as part of the Union State. To ensure that these documents are of high quality, it is of course important to put in a lot of effort, and I believe personally that reaching out to your federation, to representatives of the business community, is extremely important. There will be a specific group supervising the process, and obviously the key player will be the Ministry of Economics, but all the authorities, all the agencies somehow relevant to the situation, relevant to those 28 programs, will be involved. And I will forward your willingness to take part in those programs. And I believe it will be settled in a positive way. These programs are extremely important. It is important to comply with and portray the interests of the Belarusian side to each and every word. Then we would like to give the floor to Народная воля. My name is Maria Koktush. In September 2020, your elder son resigned from Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He made it publicly aware that he doesn't like the way things are operated at MFA. What sort of relations do you have right now? Because we know that sometimes politics can divide family. Did he consult with you in 2020 before he resigned? Did you try to persuade him against it? And what sort of relations do you have right now? The situation was related to the events in 2020, and the whole follow-up was very difficult. And I think this atmosphere, which is hugely politicized, has influenced a lot, has made an impact on specific families and a number of families. And yes, there was a certain divide between families, inside families. I think that each and every one of us has acquaintances, friends that took different sides. As for my personal relationships and relations inside my family, I prefer to keep it private. These are my personal matters, my private matters that I believe I am in charge of. I would like to apologize if I was a little too personal, but at the beginning you said that there are no closed topics. Well, certain topics are tabooed, and that is my family and my personal relations for me. But I'm not offended, everything is fine. Colleagues, if there are no other questions, that is it. Thank you very much. Thank you, dear colleagues. See you soon.